Of course, less literalist than Salafist groups and other more extreme groups, but that's the general view that a person should. What Hassan al-Banna, who was the founder of the Brotherhood in Egypt in the 1920s, saw was different degrees. Gradualism is a big part of the Brotherhood belief, is that first the idea is to create the perfect Muslim individual, then Muslim family, then Muslim society, then Muslim state, and so on. So basically the idea where Islamic law, the Sharia, governs all aspects of life. So in Muslim majority countries, that basically entails creating an Islamic society and an Islamic form of government, which wouldn't be necessarily like what we're seeing with ISIS. The way they interpret the Sharia is not as extreme as ISIS does, but nonetheless where the Sharia shapes all aspects of life. In the West, it's different. It's a group that is extremely pragmatic and flexible. So they're fully aware that they're not going to create Islamic societies in the West. It might be sort of a dream that centuries down the road, if you have a certain mindset, you'll think that eventually the whole world will embrace your views, but they're very pragmatic at heart. So their goals in the West are different, and I would sum them up in basically three. One is to spread their interpretation of Islam, but I said it's more about politics than religion. Really, it's I mean I define Islamism as a political ideology based on an interpretation of religion. So their worldview rather than their interpretation of Islam, spreading their worldview to Muslim communities. The second is basically to become the gatekeepers, as I was saying earlier, to Muslim communities for all Western interlocutors, basically, and that second goal reinforces the first. If you are the gatekeeper, if you are the self-appointed representative, you might at some point actually become the representative. So it's if the government sees you as a reliable partner, for example, that's a big thing in a lot of European countries, to teach Islam in schools, then the government will appoint you to teach Islam in public schools, and then you have the ability to shape the education system. So becoming the gatekeeper is a very important thing for them. And the third is to do like any other lobbying group, is to influence policy on anything that has to do with Islam and Islamism, both domestically and international. So to lobby for the Brotherhood or Brotherhood branches in the Middle East and North Africa, on all other issues that are of interest, to be, again, the Muslim voice when politicians reach out and want to know what the Muslims think. They want to be the ones telling you that's what Muslims think. So those, I would say, are the three goals.
Thank you. And Chair, if I may, one more. But many countries, or not many, but some countries, have actually designated them as a terrorist organization. Do you agree with that, and do you think that that's the way Canada should go?
Yeah, a few countries have. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates have designated the Brotherhood. Well, Syria has for a long time. It's complicated. I think it has to do a lot with legal systems. And I'm no expert on, I'm sorry, on Canadian, what the requirements are under Canadian law for designation. I think it's fair to say that for some branches of the Brotherhood, again, it's not a monolithic entity. The way it works is that you have different branches in each country. Obviously, the Egyptian one is the most important, but you just cross the border, you go to Libya, and the Libyan branch of the Brotherhood is 99% independent from the Egyptian one. So who do you designate? Do you designate the Brotherhood in Egypt, the Brotherhood in every Arab country? We're talking about an organization that has branches in, give or take, 60, 70 countries. There's an international organization, although it's questionable how effective, how much control that international organization has over the different branches. A lot of people would argue that it's simply an incarnation of the Egyptian Brotherhood trying to control the other branches. And then you have in the West the Brotherhood 2.0s. You have those kind of organizations. In the UAE, they have designated some of the Western spin-offs of the Brotherhood as well. So it's difficult to say whether I would recommend that or not. It's, first of all, who do you designate? I think for some of the branches internationally, you have a case. Again, I go back to Libya. I think that's a very interesting, that's a clear example of Brotherhood being involved in terrorist activities. You can argue Yemen, particularly in the past, Islah, the Yemeni branch of the Brotherhood, has its leader, Abdul Majid al-Zindani, who has been designated as an al-Qaeda supporter for more than 10 years in the U.S. So you have for some branches, the case is pretty clear. For the spin-offs in the West, I think it's on a case-to-case basis. The British approach, what I mentioned briefly earlier, is interesting. I think they came to the conclusion that it cannot be done legally, and it could actually be quite problematic. It would probably, from a PR point of view, be very problematic. It would definitely trigger a battle in courts. So they weighed the pros and cons, and I think they said that the cons outweigh the pros. Nonetheless, they have decided, they opted, and I can't predict the future, but I think with the Tories in power now, they're going to go even more aggressive, of making their life very difficult, of having a clear understanding throughout government that they are part of the problem, not part of the solution. So no support, but also using what I would argue is the Al Capone, as an Italian, I always like the analogy, the Al Capone law enforcement approach. Okay, you're not an illegal organization, but we cannot put you, cannot designate you, we cannot prosecute you for terrorism-related matters, but I bet you that you have problems when you pay your taxes, or that a lot of our financial activities are not exactly above board, and you do see a bunch of investigations taking place on a lot of the charities in the UK. So,
thank you. That's very informative.
Senator Desjardins and then Senator Bayak.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vandino.
But I think it'll be just the two of us. If you want, we do it any time. Very comfortable, but yeah.
Cappuccino for good evening for this evening. It's okay. Alors vous me comprenez pour la traduction.
So you do understand what I'm saying? You are recognized as a specialist on radicalization. Your presentation was an excellent overview of your experience in European counter-radicalization. I'd like to hear what you think about the effectiveness of European counter-radicalization efforts to this day. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the current debate is moving toward prevention. Could you tell us about that, please?
Well, first of all, it's difficult to assess European level because at the end of the day, all counter-radicalization initiatives are done at the country level. So each country should be analyzed individually. The European Union only does some coordination work, but at the end of the day, all activities are at the individual country level. The effectiveness is, as I said, a very difficult thing to assess, to measure. The idea is, general idea, is that the big kind of programs which were funded at the beginning, 2005, 2006, they almost look like social engineering programs, big integration initiatives, interfaith. There's less enthusiasm, as I said in my presentation. They're very expensive. They are built on the idea that lack of integration produces radicalization, and I think that idea is challenged by a lot of people. Obviously, there's no consensus on issues of radicalization, but the idea is that we do not know for sure if lack of integration causes radicalization. A lot of people disagree. But second, even if it's true, should really pro-integration initiatives, as good as they are, of course, they should be there, but should they be part of a counter-radicalization strategy? Should law enforcement and intelligence agencies be running integration and interfaith dialogues? So it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. As I said, the focus has shifted on programs that are cheaper, smaller, which are the one-on-one interventions. And there's enthusiasm on that because the results are relatively good. Now, there's a lot of problems in getting hard data because of privacy laws. So you have to rely on what governments tell you, and it's difficult to get a second opinion. But they are investing a lot of resources in them, particularly over the last 2 years because of the foreign fighters issue. And as I said, the problems in prosecuting individuals, and CVE programs are the only alternative to just doing nothing about it because of lack of legal recourses. The head of the British police in charge of Channel, which is a British counter-radicalization intervention program, talked about a 95 to 100% success rate, which is obviously very, very high. Some would question that. Probably what is arguable is that there are programs that intervene on people who are at the very beginning of the radicalization trajectory. Nonetheless, that's still a good thing. It's numbers that are weeded out, from what is already a very large number of radicalized individuals. The engagement part, which is the third kind of family of counter-radicalization initiatives, is also another very intangible aspect. It's a lot of these meetings with Muslim communities. Sometimes people make fun of them. It's all these tea drinking sessions. What comes out of it? And of course, it's very difficult to measure it in hard data. But I think there are ways to show that kind of initiatives are useful. 10 years ago, we had another foreign fighters mobilization, which was for Iraq, with much smaller numbers, but we had a few hundred Europeans who went to fight in Iraq for Al-Qaeda. I'm hard-pressed to think of even one case of relative, friend, who went to the police, who went to intelligence agencies reporting the case of, a relative, a brother, a friend who was going to Iraq to fight. Now that's a common dynamic. I know it's the same in Canada, where you have many cases in which families, relatives go to the police. And I would argue, difficult to say, difficult to prove it, but arguably it is the byproduct of this engagement, of this trust-building measures, breaking into communities which traditionally and historically, for understandable reasons, have always seen law enforcement as the enemy rather than a friend. And years of engagement, I think, have helped. So it's the problem, obviously, and I empathize with some of the people, some of my colleagues that sit in front of panels like this and try to justify the effectiveness of CVE measures with hard data, and sometimes it's very difficult. But sometimes, obviously, the result is there. It's maybe not immediately visible, but you might see 10 years later.
Mais je comprends, monsieur.
Mr. Vandino, as you said, it can be difficult to obtain data which are held by governments. However, in your opinion, does prevention work? Has there been an improvement in the preventive system?
I think it does. I think it's not my opinion. It's the opinion of, I would argue, every single government in the Western world, that it's part of a comprehensive counterterrorism strategy. The people that agree the most with this are really the people who deal with the hard stuff. Some of the firmest believers in the softer part of thing in prevention are the people on the ground in law enforcement and intelligence, who understand that some of these initiatives are crucially important. Now, we're not going to be successful all the time, but when the case of the 16-year-old that's how the British started the Channel program, is after they discovered the case of the Hasib Hussein, who was one of the 4 7/7 London bombers. It was the guy who blew himself on the bus. And he was the only one who was not known to authorities. The other 3 were kind of already known to MI5, and he was not known. The only thing that they knew after they started investigating after the attacks was that he had been scribbling, "I love Al-Qaeda," and so on and so forth on his books in school. And the teacher had picked up on that and had gone to the principal. They talked about it, and nothing got done because there was no system in place to do anything about it. the Brits after that create, and because of other cases, of course, create a channel. Other European countries have these systems where that teacher, that principal have a place to report that case, and then to a certain entity, which could be, and again, it changes from European country to country. In some cases, it's the police. In some cases, it's the municipality. In some other cases, civil society organizations. So generally, I'm a fan of a light police footprint in this, for trust reasons with the community. But that structure then sets up some kind of intervention. Now, will it work all the time? Obviously not. Will it work, let's say, 50% of the time? That's great. If it does, that's great. And the idea is in European countries is that it does work in many cases. And that's good because, A, it relieves the police and the intelligence of a lot of work. They are already overwhelmed with cases. And if it's 50% less case, great. And also, it's in the best interest of the individual, of the young person radicalizing. The language that the British use is the language of safeguarding. This kind of intervention are done in the best interest, in the first place, of the young person radicalizing. The way teachers were approached was saying, if you were to see that your student was involved in gangs, was targeted by pedophiles, would you report the case? Yes. Radicalization is the same thing. It's another social ill. That's kind of the language that is being used in Europe. It's a social ill that targets young people. So teachers, community leaders, social workers should see it as such and report it. It does work in some cases. It does absolutely work in some cases.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur.
Beak. And Senator No.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Professor Vandino. I share Senator Mitchell's admiration for your work, and wonder if you know, I credit the UK landslide for the Conservatives for their Homeland Secretary, Theresa May, who has been working for years on this problem. They believed in integration in the beginning and in outreach, but have now decided, as you said, to take the tougher approach. But my question is in a different vein, and I wondered if, from your experience in the UK, you might advise Canada on better managing alleged radical spiritual leaders who are coming here. They're self-proclaimed spiritual leaders, people like Tariq Ramadan, and have some good work, but also have some mixed documented messages that they say in other countries. Do you see a problem for that here in Canada, and how would you advise us to address it?
Yeah, I think that's a problem that is common to, well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. It's a problem that is common to all countries. Obviously, the influx of more or less radical individuals who come here and promote certain views without knowing the legal framework in Canada, so what the law says in terms of who can be allowed and not allowed. I think in a lot of countries, the approach has been that certain individuals that clearly espouse radical views should not be allowed in the country. So that's a pretty standard MO in the vast majority of Western countries. Obviously,
Visit list, is that...
yeah, or it's done on a case-by cases. When they know that certain individual is coming, particularly from outside, let's say in Europe, outside from the Schengen area, and requires a visa, the government takes a decision not to let him in. There's quite a few people that's normally, so actually, certain groups know which countries are tougher, so you enter the Schengen area, you ask the visa in a certain European country, so then you can tour the other countries on that visa. But so few people would ask the visa to the French, because everyone knows the French are pretty tough on this. But maybe other countries are a bit softer, and then you enter Europe from that. So there's a lot of that. But yeah, of course, it's done. Obviously, I think you have issues of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and one has to tread very carefully when limiting that, even from non-citizens, people who come from outside, obviously. And I think certain communities would feel targeted if certain individuals, just because they're controversial, are being denied access to the country. So it's obviously again, on a case-by-case basis, it's difficult to advocate a full, what is the determining factor that says yes or no. Obviously, advocating for violence should probably be one of those factors, but it's a very delicate choice to be made on a case-by-case basis. I think on even those individuals that would be allowed, I think we go back to the no platform, no tolerance. Legal tolerance is not does not equal civic tolerance. So if certain individual does come into the country and maybe goes to a certain university to speak, maybe there is something to put in pressure on that university and telling them, well, as much as we understand that universities should be bastions of free speech, they should also be places where certain kind of hatred should not be tolerated. And I guess, a good old naming and shaming sometimes does work. And I think, making it clear that providing a platform to certain individuals and certain views should not be tolerated. Then if they decide to go ahead and do it anyways, okay, so be it. But attention to the problem and framing it in the right way. I think in many cases it's not about what some of these individuals say when it comes to foreign policy and criticizing Canadian or any other Western country foreign policy, but it's the things that they say on, go back to the issues that should be dear to everybody, women rights, gay rights, freedom of religion, these core issues. And generally, when you're going to see very hardcore views on foreign policy, you're going to have, those views are going to be matched by very radical views on those issues. And I think there should be little tolerance for that.
Senator No?
That was very helpful.
Thank you, Chair. I have questions for you. I have two, but I'm going to ask you one. Number one first. Have you conducted on any research on the foreign funding coming into North America to support the spread of the radical religious ideological in Canada? That's the question number one. And the question number two is can you elaborate more on your comments about victimization narrative?
Yeah.
And what are you? Who are the Muslim Brotherhood organizations in Canada, if you know?
Yeah. When it comes to foreign funding, as I said, it's what sets the Brotherhood apart from other organizations. It's their access to funds, their ability to, compensate for the very small numbers with a very deep wallet. The sources of funding are not always very clear. Some of them are very, very good businessmen. Again, the background of a lot of these individuals is they're very successful businessmen. So they raise in their own community, they have their own businesses. Arguably, though, the majority of funds, at least in the past, came from supporters in the Arab Gulf region. It becomes a very difficult dynamic it's one of those things that everybody knows, but it's sometimes a bit difficult to prove, smoking gun. A lot of it is it's a cash-only business, and therefore it becomes difficult. Obviously, some of those sources of funding have dried up over the last few years. A lot of Gulf countries have really changed their policies on the Brotherhood, some dramatically, and that's something that I think when looking at let me open a parenthesis a bit, at banning the Brotherhood, or anyways positions that the government should take. I think that's something to be taken into consideration, is that there will be very few countries in the Arab world, actually I can think of only one, that will be opposed to that. And a lot of countries would actually take that as in a very positive light. I'm not saying that should be done to appease countries in the Arab Gulf, but I'm saying that's a position that most countries would have. The government of Qatar has traditionally been, over the last 4 or 5 years, the largest sponsor of Brotherhood organizations in North America and in Europe. I think you have private individuals in other Gulf countries that support them. So it's not at the government level, but it's wealthy individuals in those countries. Even though in Saudi and in the UAE now it's illegal to do so. So it's always a bit complicated to get foreign funding. When it comes to to understand exactly the dynamics of foreign funding, the dynamic of victimization, it's the narrative that I think it's common to any kind of extremist ideology. The first part of any ideology is to tell its followers that they are under attack, they're being victimized, if there's a conspiracy against them. And then what any ideology does, it gives you a vision for a better tomorrow, and then it tells you how you can be part of that solution. That's, think about any extremist ideology, right-wing ideology, there's a giant Zionist conspiracy, and any ideology has that part. So in the Brotherhood narrative, it's a big conspiracy of the West and secular governments in the Arab world against not Islamists, but against Islam and Muslims. That's how they put it. And as I said, they put together all kinds of issues, whether it's big geopolitical issues, to local dynamics, to issues of Islamophobia that do exist, undeniably. Nobody's saying that as any narrative, it has to have at least some grounding in reality. But obviously, the ability of the Brotherhood is to exploit, magnify issues that do exist and weave them into this very conspiratorial and negative narrative. What are the organizations in Canada that trace their roots to the Brotherhood? As I said, in the West, you're not going to have any organization that is called Muslim Brotherhood in Holland, Muslim Brotherhood in Canada, and so on. In some cases, they vehemently deny any link to the Brotherhood. And if we keep the analysis on a formal level, they have a point. When they don't have a membership card in their passport, also some of them are part of Brotherhood in their country of origin, it's somewhat more informal. What you have is organizations that are created by individuals who have personal ties to different branches of the Brotherhood back in the Middle East, and who have personal, financial, organizational, and ideological ties to the movement. So Muslim Association of Canada would be the first name that comes to mind. Clear links there, where you have prominent individuals that for 20, 30 years have been involved in Brotherhood groups both in Canada and in the United States. What used to be called CARE Canada, same thing. Charities like Islamic Relief, Irfan, of course, is gone, but it was part of that. If you look at these 8, 10 organizations, you basically see that it's always kind of the same people that are involved in them. And that's kind of the milieu. The title of my book is The New Muslim Brotherhood in the West, because in a way it's the Brotherhood 2.0. They're not, part of a pyramid with Cairo on top, but they have the same worldview and the same MO as the Brotherhood.
Senator No, we're going to come to an end here pretty soon.
Okay. You answer part of my question. My next question I would like to ask you is, besides the UK action taken against the Muslim Brotherhood, so-called, what are others country in the European that take the same thing, the same similar path or similar actions? Or what are they doing? Sort of.
Yeah, I'm turning on my computer because I want to read a couple of things from you, because I had prepared. Let me put it like this. Traditionally, I think things have changed a bit over the last couple of years. There's been a divide between continental Europe, in the Western world, between continental Europe and the Anglo-Saxon world, where continental Europe has taken a traditionally much more negative and pessimistic view of the Brotherhood, and the Anglo-Saxon world was somewhat more favorable to the Brotherhood. I think things have changed. I talked about the shift in the UK, but the approach in continental Europe has been of seeing the Brotherhood in a very negative way. Now, assessing one group in a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that the way then you deal with them, you engage with them, follows that assessment. There's a lot of factors that come into play, politics, a lot of issues. But generally speaking, European intelligence agencies have a very, very negative view of the Brotherhood. Let me read to you a couple of quotes very briefly. I understand that time is a problem, but this is from the Dutch. I have German, Belgian, they all pretty much say the same. It says, and this is from the AIVD, which is Dutch, and it's the equivalent of CSIS, Dutch intelligence agencies. Not all Muslim brothers or their sympathizers are recognizable as such. They do not always reveal their religious loyalties and ultra-Orthodox agenda to outsiders. apparently cooperative and moderate in their attitude to Western society, they certainly have no violent intent. But they are trying to pave the way for ultra-Orthodox Islam to play a greater role in the Western world.